Hello and welcome to another episode of Building Microservices with Go with me, Nick Jackson. And today what we're going to look at is gRPC error handling. That's right, error handling in gRPC because it's not the same as REST. And I think this can be confusing for some folks, but I hope after you've watched this episode and seen some examples, you'll see that it's not that bad. But there is complexity. Now let's take a quick dig into this. So error handling in gRPC. Now the key thing that you need to remember is that you're not using the HTTP transport in the same way that you would with a RESTful approach. So with a RESTful approach, you're issuing HTTP requests and you're using HTTP status codes to measure the response. So you're going to have things like a 200, or you're going to have things like a 404 for not found. We're going to follow that standard approach. Now, the thing with gRPC is the gRPC doesn't use HTTP status codes. So an error in gRPC or a failed request could still return an HTTP 200 because the transport was decoupled from the actual messages itself. With gRPC, what you're doing is you're encoding your errors into your protobufs. So you do have the concept of error handling, and you do have the concept of error codes. Now, error codes, they don't correspond to HTTP status codes. So don't think that an OK in gRPC is going to be the same as HTTP 200. I think it's actually code 0. But you do have the case of general errors, status deadlines, internal status errors, all of those things. And we're going to take a look at how we can implement these and how we can build these and use them. And it's pretty straightforward. So let's take a look at this Unary operator getRate. Now what getRate takes is a request of a rate request, which has the currency and the destination, and it returns a response of the rate with the currency and the destination just as an identifier. Now, what we want to do here is, let's say we want to do some validation. So what I want to do is I want to validate that the currency and the destination are not the same. So let's take a look at how we would do that. So what we would do is we'd do something simple like this, okay? We'd go if rr.base is not equals rr.destination, and then we can return an error. So we would say, I don't know, we're going to return nil. So we're not going to return a rate response, but we're going to return an error. The error is going to be something along the lines of format.errorf, and we're just going to say base cannot be the same as the destination. Now, if you had been if you were doing that in REST, what you would do is you would return an HTTP status code, and you'd probably run something like precondition failed or something to indicate that validation wasn't working. And we can do something similar in gRPC. So rather than just getting this error message back, what we can actually do is use gRPC status. Because actually under the hood, what is being returned here is an RPC status type. So let's take a look at that. So what we can do to create a more rich error message with gRPC is we can use the status package and errorf. So we can do something like this. We can say error, and we can say equals status dot errorf. Now errorf has this enrichment, which has a status code. It has a format and an interface. So let's have a look at what we can do here. So we could say, all right, well, what's our code going to be? Well, we can use the gRPC codes, and we should do, right? We should use the standard code. So codes dot, and we could say, well, invalid argument. That makes sense. You've sent a base and a destination, which is the same. So I'm going to send back an invalid argument code. And then I can put my message in as before. So I could say base currency cannot be the same as the destination currency. And that's kind of nice. And I could have put some bits and pieces in here as well. So, I could say, well, base currency %s cannot be the same as the destination currency %s, because this is an error f. So I can then say, well, r dot destination dot string, and oops, I got those the wrong way around. Let's just fix that up. r dot base dot string. So I've got that error. I'm creating that error message, and it's a rich error message because it has a status code and it has a bit of a sort of a formatted string there, and I can return that just like this. So I can just say error, okay? Because status.errorf, if you dig into this, what you actually have is sort of an underlying error message. But all of the things in the status package are using this underlying object, which is the RPC status. And we'll come back to this in a little bit. But for now, we're just using this status utility. It allows me to do things like create error messages. I can set the codes, and it handles all of the serialization for me. And it also means that my status object is compatible with error. So I've got that. Now, one of the nice things about the gRPC error message is that I can add metadata to it. So for example, I might have another error message, or I might have some data that I want to add. So let's have a look. Let's have a look what here. I've got error and I've got nothing. Okay, now that's interesting. But this is a gRPC status. So what else could I use? Let's take a look at a different way of creating this. So rather than doing error f, which directly creates an error message compatible with the gRPC status, let's see what else I've got. I can create error f, new f. Okay, so new f, rather than it directly returning an error, it returns me status. Let's see what happens when I change it to new f. So now error has the access to all of these underlying methods, because if we look at the gRPC status object, and I've got it just over here, you can see that it has a code, a message, and it also has any. Now I'm going to dig into these sort of special keywords in gRPC in the next lesson, but for now, any means that you're allowed to have a collection, that's demarked by repeated there, of any protocol buffer. Any protobuf can go in here, and more than one of them. So that details is what we can actually use for metadata. So if I go back over to my currency, what I can do is I can say, I've got this with details, and that's going to return me a copy of my status, but allowing me to add metadata on there. Okay, so I can say with details, and I could say that, well, what are my details going to be? Well, let's just add the request on there for the time being. And then we could say error again, and then WDE, because actually it is possible that this can throw an error when you're actually trying to create a copy of this. So we just need to handle that. And we're just going to return that in that instance. It should be pretty rare that we get that error, but let's make sure we're defensively coding. And we're going to get this copy back. So we've now got an error. It's a status.status, and it has with details. Now, I can't just return error because error isn't an error. Right, terrible naming. Apologies. But if you look at the methods which are on a status object, you'll see that one is called error. And what that's going to do is that'll return you a Go error, which is basically a wrap of the gRPC status object encapsulated in the error format. So that can then be serialized over the wire, and we can get that back. So let's take a look. Let's run that code. So I'm going to go run, and I'm just going to do main.go. Okay, so I'm running my service there, and I'm just going to open up a new terminal. I'm going to use gRPC curl again. So gRPC curl, and we want to do blah, 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 something like that. We want to get the rate. So let's first try this normally. Right, dollars and pounds. Okay, and that works fine. And we can see it's just handled perfectly fine. Now let's try this when we just do USD. And you can see that I've actually got a gRPC error message back. There's a differentiation. So this is what the gRPC error message, you see all of those rich details. So the metadata that I added, the clean error message, and the status code. Just as an example, let's just run that again, but this time, let's just return an ordinary error message. So I'm just going to do format.errorf, boom, okay. Rerun that application, and then just run that gRPC curl again. First one is working. Now let's do with the same. And you see there, now the error message I've got back, it's just a plain error. It doesn't have a code, it's got no metadata, and it just has the message. And to be fair, I could have in that message encoded, you know, the same thing, base currency, blah, blah, blah. But I'm losing the enrichment that's provided to me by the gRPC protocol. Okay, so that's Unary operators. Now, let's take a look, actually, how we can handle this in the client. And let's see how we can decode this error message in the client. So if we go over to our product API, and again, if you kind of watch back a couple of the videos, you see the structure of this, but we basically have our product API, which calls the currency API, which is a gRPC API. This is where we are calling get rate. So we're calling that Unary operator in gRPC. And what we're doing is we're just getting the error message and we're just passing it on. Now, if you look at what you get from the Go's gRPC framework, from the code that's generated from you, you get back Proto's rate response and an error, just a plain Go error. Now, we know that this is actually a rich gRPC error because we're sending it here. We're constructing it and we're sending it. So what we can actually do is we can try and convert this basic Go error and deserialize it into a rich gRPC error. So the first thing we're going to check, if it's not nil, then what we can do is we can try and convert it into a gRPC error. And again, we use that status package. So status dot from error. So take a look at this. So status from error is going to return a gRPC status, which represents the error if it was produced from this package or has a method, blah, 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 status, which it was produced from this package because we created it over here. So we can use this from error. Now from error is going to return us a status and okay if it can be converted. So I'm just going to call status S and then I'm going to say okay. So passing in error there. Now, if we get this error message here, we can check. So we can say if, well, why don't we just put this in a block here? So we can just say if S blah, 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 and then okay. So now, if it can be converted, we can handle the message ever so differently. We can be a little bit richer about what's going on here. So rather than just returning something, the plain old error message back, let's return a better experience for our users of our API, and let's return a richer error message. So what we can say? Well, we can say, let's just say format.errorf, because we're back into plain Go RESTful. And we could say unable to get rate from currency server. Now, we could put some additional information in here. So let's have a look. What we could say is, we could say, well, we want the base rate. Or we can get that from S, and we could say, well, we've got this with details. So if we want to get the base rate, we can get that from the metadata because we know it's encoded in there. So let's get our metadata. So I'm going to say metadata, and I'm going to do S dot details. That returns me a collection. I know it's going to be the first item, so I can get that from my first item in my collection. Now, this is not typed. It's just returning interface. So you do have to have an understanding of what's kind of going on with these error messages. I could just run through things and look at things with reflection or something like that, but I wrote both sides of this, so I can actually put a little bit more information in there. You could also package this up into a client if you are going to build a client for the consumer rather than allowing people to have to implement it themselves. But we can cast it quite simply. We know it is protos.rate request. I just want to show you the art of the possible. And then we can do MD, and we can get all of the various different things. So I can get the base currency, get that as a string, and I can get the currency, the base currency, and I can also get the destination currency. Destination string. So I can do my error F, and I'm going to say unable to get currency from server. I can say base %s dest %s. Pretty nice, okay? But what we haven't done yet is we haven't looked at that error code, because it's possible that a number of different types of error might be returned from the server, and you might be getting sort of different handling on each of those. So in the instance that we get that invalid argument, because we're getting the two currencies which are the same, the base and the destination, we can handle that. So rather than just having this kind of generic case here, we can handle that differently. So let's take a look. We can just say if s.code equals codes.invalid argument. And what I want to do, if I've got an invalid argument, I'm just going to return a nicer error message. I'm going to say unable to get currency service rate. Destination and base currencies cannot be the same. So that's just giving us the ability to enrich our error message. And let's just see that running. So I'm just going to run my currency service here. Go run main.go. And I'm going to run my API server. Whoops. Main.go. There we go. And then let's just curl that endpoint. So curl localhost 1990 product 1, and we're going to do currency, and let's do a working example with British pounds. So the base currency euros, the destination British pounds. And now let's see the difference when we do euros. And we do euro, and we're getting this error message. And if you look, the error message says unable to get the rate from the currency, destination and base can't be the same. And that's because we've picked up that invalid argument code from the rich error message that we returned over here. So that's pretty interesting. We've seen how we can handle very basic error messages for unary operations inside of our gRPC methods. We can add that augmentation of metadata from very rich data types. And also we can add those status codes in the same way as we would do with HTTP and RESTful. But there's a little bit of complexity. And the complexity comes with bidirectional streaming. So that's the first part done for gRPC error messages. And we've seen how we can handle gRPC error messages with unary methods. And this is the most straightforward and probably the most common way that you're going to deal with error messages in gRPC. But we have to handle things a little bit difficult. A little difficult? Yeah, it is a little difficult, but a little differently with bidirectional streaming. And we're going to look at that in the next episode. So like and subscribe. We've got that coming up very, very soon. And we'll walk through the patterns on how you can use error messages in bidirectional gRPC streams. But until then, thank you so much for watching.